So, what is ADHD? Oh, look, a blue car. Ha, I'm only kidding. I'm allowed to make those jokes. So, ADHD is probably the most, if one of the most, or the most misunderstood aspect of neurodivergency because it can be very, very different for different people. So, with ADHD, now the H in ADHD stands for hyperactivity. However, there are those who are more hyperactive and those who are more inattentive, who are more withdrawn. So that's an important thing to note is that if you believe yourself or a loved one or a colleague or a friend to not be ADHD because they're not bouncing off the walls every 5 seconds, then it's just one of those outdated misconceptions that hopefully this clears up. So, ADHD, like autism, it's a neurodevelopmental difference that affects how someone processes information, regulates their attention, and interacts with those around them. ADHD isn't a flaw or a disorder in the traditional sense. It can certainly take time to adapt to it, to work with it, to understand it yourself. If you are ADHD or someone you know, love, or work with is ADHD. So, again, in our usual traditional sense, we're going to lead with the strengths first. We're not going to ignore the challenges. So, ADHD, many individuals who are ADHD possess really, really unique abilities, as in, again, with creativity and innovation. So, ADHD minds often think outside the box, like it's totally outside the box, making connections that others can't see, and then even a hyper focus on getting things done in a certain way, which may seem much quicker than the average person, but it can have really, really positive effects. So, whenever I was at school, I found myself being able to do a couple of our exams in 45 minutes. I could just do it so much more quickly, getting that focus in, getting it all out in paper. And of course, this can cause challenges both in learning and in the workplace. So, kind of being able to do a task in a much quicker speed is very common. Problem solving is a big ADHD trait, as well as artistic expression, brainstorming new ideas, getting things out there. The ADHD mind can go in two speeds normally. It's the speed of light, which is 182,582 miles per second, or stop. Often, I suppose that's my experience and the experience of a lot of others. Again, resilience and adaptability. Growing up in a world that isn't always ADHD friendly fosters strong resilience, adaptability, and an ability to thrive in changing environments, because what we need to move away from, both in education and in the workplace, is the idea of backside on seat, eyes forward for many, many hours at a time, because it simply doesn't work. I certainly can't sit for many hours at a time and focus on one thing. I need movement breaks, mind breaks to self regulate, and even to affix different levels of focus on different tasks throughout the day. Hyperfocus is another common thing, and you may notice that there's a lot of overlap between autistic traits and ADHD traits. And ADHD is mostly associated with attention challenges, but some can have deep states of hyperfocus, as I kind of just said, I suppose. And that means that productivity levels and expertise can be really, really high. High energy and enthusiasm. This is my favorite ADHD trait. So, often, believe it or not, we can bring enthusiasm and humor and excitement to our interests, our interactions, our workplace, which can inspire those around us. Which I love that. And spontaneity. So many of us embrace adventure, take bold risks, thrive in dynamic, fast-paced settings where others might even hesitate. So you may find a lot of ADHDers, particularly in action sports, whether it's skydiving, bungee jumping, motocross, alpine skiing, MMA fighting, boxing, inline skating, skateboarding, and various other things. But as promised, we can't ignore the challenges as well, particularly in environments that do require rigid attention and structure, like school or like at work. So Executive functioning differences. So ADHD can impact planning, organization, time management, prioritization, which can make tasks like completing assignments, managing schedules, or following multi step instructions more challenging. Which is, if you look at ADHD individuals across the lifespan, that's always going to be a really key feature, which is going to be task management, whether that's school based assignments or even workplace projects and deadlines. Impulsivity and emotional regulation is another huge challenge. So, a lot of ADHD individuals can have difficulty in pausing before acting, regulating emotions, or responding proportionally to situations, which can affect relationships and decision making. Guilty as charged. So, here's another interesting thing is it's called, if you look at the dictionary definition or the DSM definition, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. It should be attention variability, not a deficit. So ADHD isn't necessarily a lack of attention, but it's a difference in attention regulation. So many ADHD individuals struggle with focus on uninteresting tasks, but can hyper focus on really, really engaging activities. Um, there are more challenges in ADHD individuals with work and memory difficulties. So, retaining short term information, like remembering instructions or details from a conversation, can sometimes be challenging and can need some accommodations. Task initiation and motivation can be a big challenge among ADHDers. So, the ADHD brain is interest based rather than priority based, which can mean that starting or completing tasks that don't feel rewarding can be difficult, even when the person wants to actually complete them. So, let's look at the differences between ADHD in children and adults. So, with children, ADHD in children often presents as high energy, curiosity, impulsivity, or difficulty sitting still in structured settings like school. Uh, some may daydream, struggle with organization, or need movement to stay engaged. So, with the right accommodations and the right strengths based support, ADHD children can manage really well in schools, and those little differences can really make a massive impact. What about adults? So many ADHD adults have learned coping mechanisms, but still face challenges with time management, organization, emotional regulation, and some may receive a diagnosis later in life, bringing, I suppose, that sense of closure and the answer to the question of why am I different? Very much the same as autism. So many say there's an ADHD epidemic where most ADHD adults were described in their childhood as difficult, cantankerous, daydreamer, and various other incorrect and derogatory terms. And people always ask, why do people come forward for an ADHD diagnostic later in life? So our neurotype sits here and our coping mechanisms sit up here. This stays the same. And as we go through the lifespan, our coping mechanisms reduce and reduce and reduce, which is why a lot of adults in particular can find a lot of workplace challenges on down the line. So that is the highest level of ADHD. Of course, it is going to be different for everybody. But that is the broad benchmark as to what ADHD is, the strengths, the challenges, and how it can differentiate in children and indeed adults.